The Pastor Who Defied Hitler. Germany, 1933. The world is unraveling, and a new Führer has risen from the wreckage of a broken nation. His rallies thunder with chants of unity and power. His speeches promise salvation, and his face is everywhere. To millions, Adolf Hitler is the answer. But in the midst of that storm stood a quiet, bespectacled man. Not a soldier, not a politician, a pastor. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And while much of Germany surrendered its soul to the Reich, Bonhoeffer became something rare, a voice of conscience. His defiance would carry him from pulpits to underground seminaries, from secret plots to prison cells and, finally, to the gallows. This is the story of the pastor who defied Hitler. Chapter 1: Roots of Defiance. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was born in 1906 into a wealthy, well-educated German family. His father was a psychiatrist, his mother a cultured teacher of music and faith. Unlike many who grew up poor and desperate in post-war Germany, Bonhoeffer was sheltered from hardship. Yet from an early age, he was drawn not to prestige or power, but to questions of morality. At just 14, he announced he would become a pastor and theologian. His siblings laughed, calling the church irrelevant in a modern world. But Dietrich was serious. He believed faith wasn't just private belief, was lived action. By his 20s, he was studying in New York, where he encountered the Harlem Renaissance and black churches preaching a gospel of liberation. He absorbed their passion for justice, their refusal to separate faith from the struggles of the oppressed. That experience would shape his view of what Christianity must stand for. So when he returned to Germany in 1931, just as Hitler's movement was rising, he recognized danger before most of his countrymen. Chapter 2: A Nation in Chains. Hitler promised to restore German pride. He wrapped his politics in religious language, presenting himself almost as a messiah. Crowds filled stadiums, swastikas draped altars, and pastors lined up to pledge loyalty to the Führer. But Bonhoeffer saw something chilling. Christianity was being hijacked. Crosses were replaced with swastikas. Pulpits praised nationalism instead of compassion, and churches taught obedience over truth. Just days after Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, Bonhoeffer gave a radio address. His topic: the danger of a leader who makes himself an idol. He warned that when a man sets himself above morality, above God, he becomes a misleader. The broadcast was cut off mid-sentence. Already, Bonhoeffer had drawn the regime's attention. Chapter 3: Resistance in the Church. In 1934, Bonhoeffer helped form the Confessing Church, a movement of pastors who rejected Nazi control. They declared that no government, no Führer, could dictate the gospel. Only Christ was the head of the church. This was not just theology, it was rebellion. In a country where conformity meant safety, the Confessing Church stood out. Bonhoeffer began training young pastors in secret seminaries. His lessons weren't just about Scripture. They were about courage, integrity, and living a life together that resisted the fear-choking Germany. Yet the Gestapo tightened its grip. By 1937, they shut down Bonhoeffer's seminary. Hundreds of pastors were arrested. Some were executed. Bonhoeffer could have escaped. He was offered academic positions abroad, and in 1939 he even returned to New York. But he couldn't stay. "I will have no right to participate in the rebuilding of Christian life in Germany," he wrote, "if I do not share the trials of this time with my people." Within weeks, he was back in Berlin. Chapter 4. From Faith to Conspiracy. By the early 1940s, Bonhoeffer faced a crushing moral dilemma. Could a man of faith participate in a plot to kill? Through his brother-in-law, Hans von Donigny, he was introduced to a secret circle of German officers plotting Hitler's assassination. These weren't reckless rebels. They were patriots who believed Hitler was destroying Germany's soul. Bonhoeffer joined them. Ironically, he was recruited into the German military intelligence agency, the Abwehr. But instead of serving the Reich, he used his post as cover to work against it. He acted as a courier, carrying secret messages across borders. He helped Jews escape to Switzerland, using intelligence operations as a smokescreen. Theologian, spy, conspirator, Bonhoeffer's life had become a paradox. A man of peace choosing to embrace treason, because he believed silence was no longer an option. Chapter 5. The Prisoner. In April 1943, Bonhoeffer was arrested. Officially, it was for helping Jews escape. But the Gestapo soon discovered his deeper involvement in the conspiracy. He was moved from prison to prison, interrogated, pressured, and yet he never broke. In his cell, he wrote letters, and reflections later published as Letters and Papers from Prison. They reveal a man wrestling with despair, yet clinging to hope. He wrote, "We must live as if God does not exist, and yet never cease to believe and to pray." To fellow prisoners, he was a source of calm. They described him as humble, kind, quietly joyful even in chains. When despair spread through the cells, Bonhoeffer would sing hymns, pray with others, and remind them that dignity could survive even here. Chapter 6. The Final Days. In July 1944, the most famous plot to kill Hitler, an attempt with a bomb hidden in a briefcase, failed. Hundreds were arrested. Many were executed, and Bonhoeffer's role became clear. He was transferred to Buchenwald concentration camp, then to Flossenburg. By April 1945, as Allied forces closed in, Hitler grew desperate. In his paranoia, he ordered the execution of anyone connected to the conspiracy. On April 9th, Bonhoeffer's name was called. Witnesses recall he prayed, then walked calmly to the gallows. The camp doctor, a hardened man, later wrote, "I have hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissive to the will of God." Bonhoeffer was 39 years old. Just 2 weeks later, American forces liberated the camp. Chapter 7. Legacy. Dietrich Bonhoeffer left behind no army, no wealth, no power. What he left was words written from pulpits, classrooms, and prison cells, words that still challenge us. He insisted that faith must act, that neutrality in the face of evil is itself evil, that comfort is not an excuse for silence. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil, he wrote. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. His courage became a beacon, not just for Christians, but for anyone who believes morality is worth dying for. Today, Bonhoeffer is remembered as a martyr, a theologian, and a man whose conscience was stronger than the Reich. Poetic ending. When we think of resistance to Hitler, we often imagine armies, generals, battles. But sometimes resistance is quieter. Sometimes it looks like a man in glasses, standing at a pulpit, refusing to bend his words to a dictator. Bonhoeffer reminds us that defiance can begin with conviction, that even in the darkest times, conscience can survive. And maybe that's why his voice still echoes louder than the empire that tried to silence him. Because truth, once spoken, has a way of outlasting tyrants.